Hello everyone. We are going to discuss the rheumatology and orthopedic portion of the AMEDEX 2024, and this is the first MCQ, which is James, a 35-year-old man, comes to the emergency department. We are dealing with the James, a middle-aged patient who has come to the emergency department after he hurt his right foot while landing into the Parker 1 hour ago. So there is a clear-cut history of the trauma. After that, the patient describes that there is, on examination, there is ever tenderness over the second right metatarsal bone as well as swelling of the foot. No motor or sensory deficit is noted. So there is no nerve entrapment or nerve injury associated with this trauma. X-rays are ordered and the following is AP view of the right foot. Which of the following is the most appropriate treatment option for him? From this diagram, you can see the different parts of the bone. The uppermost part is basically the epiphysis. Then comes the bending portion, that is metaphysis, and rest of the bone is diaphysis. So we are dealing with the diaphysis portion of this bone, and you can see this is a clear-cut fracture, and the bone is not displaced. The bone is at position, and there is a soft tissue swelling in surrounding tissue as well. So here we are dealing with a metatarsal fracture of the diaphysis position. So the patient, what is the most appropriate treatment for this patient in this scenario? Analgesia, ice and elevation, referral to the orthopedic surgeon, firm soled fracture shoe, the cylindrical cast of the right foot, or back slab cast of the right foot. In this case, the a firm soled fracture shoe is the right answer, because the reasoning behind this is that the question illustrates the management of the metatarsal fracture, and the metatarsal fracture is a very common type of fracture seen in the emergency department, and it can be due to a number of reasons: the fall from the height, sport injuries, crush injuries due to heavy object falling, axial loading, or the stress from the heavy repetitive intensive training. There are different types of the metatarsal fractures in the x-ray. As I have already shown, this is a portion of the diaphysis which we are dealing with, and there is a undisplaced fracture. There is this is important thing, there is an undisplaced fracture of the metaphyseal diaphysis, a common type of metatarsal fracture with a good prognosis. So here nothing to worry much, there it has a good prognosis. Such fractions are usually managed by the application of firm soled shoe and the walking cast for 4 to 6 weeks. The patient should be advised to bear weight on the affected area. This is very important, that the patient should not be advised bed rest and just immobilization. He should be advised that he should wear weight as much as tolerable. No follow-up is required, and the back slab cast, which was the option E, or the cylindrical cast for the immobilization, is not necessary in this case. Generally, ice and elevation to reduce the swelling analgesia is important initial measure. Whenever you read the question, last time is very important what he is asking about. So if we ask about the initial measurement, then any case of fracture, initial measurement is the same, that is ice, elevation and analgesia. Orthopedic referral for the metatarsal fracture is indicated in the following situation. Orthopedic referral is for the open fracture, displaced fracture in the 20-degree, more than 20-degree displacement, and the multiple metatarsal fractures, and the suspected Lisfranc injury. This is the Lisfranc injury. You can see the metatarsal and the tarsal bones are united, and there are different ligaments and bony complexes. This is forming a Lisfranc joint complex. So if there is a fracture of this very delicate portion of the foot, then you have to refer the patient to the orthopedic surgeon. Another indication is the Jones fracture. Jones fracture is basically a fifth metatarsophalangeal joint fracture, which is shown in this picture. This is a Jones fracture. And the neuromuscular compromise. These are all the situation in which you have to refer the patient for the orthopedic. Next comes a 30-year-old female. This is again middle-aged female with a severe muscle aches and the fatigue for the past 4 months. She denies a fever or the weight loss, but admits to mood and sleep disturbances. So there are some factor of anxiety with a middle-aged lady with no history of fever or the weight loss. So there is no red flag signs. These are the red flag signs: fever, weight loss. These are absent. Red flags are absent. On examination, there are 13 tender points in the different areas, including the neck, upper chest, inner aspects of the knee, upper thigh, lateral epicondyle. ESR, CPR, CRP, and the CK are normal. This is a very important clue for any muscle disease. If there is inflammatory pathology is there, the inflammatory marker is going to be raised. ESR and CRP are basically non-specific inflammatory markers, and CK is your specific muscle inflammatory marker. So these are giving the clue to rule out specific diseases that are associated with the inflammatory muscular diseases like polymyositis or statin induced myositis or dermatomyositis. We are ruling out those things. Which of the following could be most appropriate pharmacological treatment option? This is a clear cut scenario. Middle aged lady with a history of mood depression and early fatigue, and the tender points of the multiple joints are involved. No inflammatory marker. This is a history of the fibromyalgia. Fibromyalgia can be remembered by the mnemonic fibro. Fibro means there is fatigue, insomnia, blues. Blues is depression and anxiety, rigidity, muscle stiffness, and widespread pain. So, fibro is a clear cut mnemonic for the fibromyalgia, and you have to manage the patient with the two things. Fibromyalgia patients can be managed with either TCAs, which is tricyclic antidepressant, or SNRIs. The important thing to focus here is it's not SSRIs. SSRI is an entirely different thing. Fluoxetine is not the treatment option for fibromyalgia. We are dealing with SNRIs, which is duloxetine. This is a different thing. Duloxetine is serotonin non-adrenaline reuptake inhibitor, while SSRI fluoxetine is the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So you have to focus on these things. And another important point in this is there is a middle-aged lady, 29 to 37 years of age. 4:1 is the female to male ratio of fibromyalgia, and there is criteria for the fibromyalgia that the pain should be at least for 3 months, and there is 11 out of 18 characteristic tender point. In our scenario there were clearly 13 tender points, so it was fulfilling the criteria for the fibromyalgia. So we deal with this patient with the TCA and SNRIs. The given option amitriptyline is going to be the right option here. Next comes 52-year-old man comes to the GP practice complaining of difficulty holding and grasping objects. From the picture, you can clearly see there is an amputation of the two fingers of the hand of this patient. He has smoked 20 cigarettes per day. A young patient with a smoking history, with the amputation history. This is enough history to go for the Berger's disease to pick this scenario. But again, he's saying you immediately notice his hands in the shown for a photograph. On further probing, the patient tells you that he has similar findings on the feet as well. So there are acral vasoconstriction, typical acral vasoconstriction involving hand and feet. Which of the following is the most likely diagnosis? Again, we have made the diagnosis Berger's disease. Berger's disease is this is the summary of Berger's disease, that it is a medium vessel vasculitis, which is segmental inflammation of the small medium arteries and the veins of the extremities. It is an occlusive intravascular thrombi, and there is age of young patient less than 45 years, 70 to 90%. There is a male history. Smoking association is very strong association of smoking, and there is a Raynaud phenomena positivity in the 40% of the patients. Then diagnosis is mostly clinical, based on the age, based on the tobacco history and distal ischemia and the arteriographic finding. Exclusion of autoimmune thrombophilia, diabetes, and embolism. Treatment is first, foremost important treatment is the smoking cessation. Then comes the prostaglandin analog for pain, which is iloprost, and the calcium channel blocker for the Raynaud's, and the intermittent pneumatic compression when painful ulcers are present. So this is a summary of basically your Berger's disease. This is an important slide. You can take the screenshot of this slide. This is very important. Here the description, the clinical picture is suggestive for the thromboangiitis obliterans. The other name for the Berger's disease is thromboangiitis obliterans, and it is the most likely diagnosis. It is called Berger's disease. And another important point is there is a non-atherosclerotic segmental inflammatory, most common disease affecting the small to medium sized arteries and veins of the extremities, resulting in occlusive thrombus and distal extremity ischemia, mostly in the men of the middle age, less than 40 years of age, and the strong history of smoking. So these are all the points that are already covered in this little picture or the paragraph. Wegener's polyangiitis or the granulomatosis, which was the option B with the polyangiitis, is a rare vasculitis that is unknown cause. The classical triad is upper respiratory tract granuloma, fleeting pulmonary embolism, which is nodules, and the glomerulonephritis. So there will be a history of the pulmonary involvement. There will be history of the nephrotic involvement. Then Raynaud's phenomena, this is a non-specific thing. This is a clinical syndrome, episodic arteriolar vasospasm. Raynaud's can be a part of the Berger's disease. We have already discussed. Raynaud's involve your cold extremities, cold peripheries, and the cold exposure area like nose, ear, and nipples. These are the area which are prone to the Raynaud's phenomena. It does not cause a result of digital amputation. Then diabetes mellitus, yes, this is an important cause of the digital amputation. However, it is unlikely for the scenario in the absence of history of suggestive clinical finding. Coogan syndrome is an other important disease, which is an autoimmune vasculitis that involves your eyes and inner ear, and the symptom of the syndrome include irritation and pain in the eyes and decreased vision, hearing loss, and vertigo. Next is 9-year-old Tim is brought to emergency department by his mom after he fell off from the bike and hurt his left shoulder. So there is a history of the trauma, and there is a broken left shoulder. The left shoulder is painful and barely moving his left arm due to the pain. On physical examination, there is no bruise or deformity of the left shoulder, but there is a tenderness on the middle third of the clavicle. So this is a clear-cut history of the fracture of the clavicle. This is a very common scenario in the early childhood fractures or the trauma history. Neurovascular examination of the left hand is normal. Which of the following is most appropriate next step in the management? When you are dealing with the clavicle, you have to order for that particular side. That is, if there is history of the left clavicle fracture, you have to order for the X-ray of the left clavicle, and the AP view is mostly preferred for the clavicle fracture injury. So we are dealing with the B option is the right option here. Team has the clinical feature of fracture injury of the middle third of the clavicle, and the clavicle fractures are common in children and due to fall on the outstretched hand. This is very important line, that the fall from the outstretched hand. And when the clinical suspicion of clavicle fracture is there, then you order AP fracture, which is 15-degree cephalic tilt. This is an important thing, cephalic tilt, because when you tilt the head to the 15-degree, you basically straightens the clavicles in, and there is a clear view visualize the occult fractures. CT scan can be considered if there is a medial third of the clavicle to assess for the potential tracheal impingement of the thoracic anatomy, or there is displaced lateral third injuries to assess for the coracoacromioclavicular ligament. So if there is injury for the extreme ends of the clavicle, you will order CT scan. But if you are suspecting the injury of the middle of the clavicle, then AP view X-ray is the right option. PA view and the oblique view are not diagnostic value and they are not recommended. Suspected clavicular fractures, AP view of both clavicles and indicated only for the comparison is required, or injury to both clavicles is suspected, which was not in our case scenario. Next comes Ruth, 70 years of age, has presented to the office with a complaint of muscle weakness for the past couple of weeks. He has hypertension and the coronary heart disease, for which he is on ramipril and atorvastatin. And the physical examination is remarkable bilateral shoulder girdle muscle weakness. So there is a proximal muscle weakness and the tenderness. You order blood test, which was elevated ESR, so a non-specific inflammatory marker is elevated, but the specific inflammatory marker CK, it is normal. Which of the following is most likely diagnosis? Again, this is a clear-cut scenario. One, we had just made our mind clear that the young patient presenting with the depression history and the inflammatory markers are norming, we are dealing with the fibromyalgia. This is another clear-cut scenario. You can remember this from this picture. Old lady presenting with the girdle pain and morning stiffness, and there is normal CK but the inflammatory marker is raised, then you are dealing with the polymyalgia rheumatica. Polymyalgia rheumatica, the pathognomic for the diagnosis of polymyalgia rheumatica is the rapid improvement with the low dose corticosteroid, which is very important. Prednisone acts as a magic for this lady. So this picture is very important for summarizing all the topic of the polymyalgia rheumatica. You can remember is that such, or take the screenshot for this picture. Then our diagnosis is polymyalgia rheumatica, polymyositis, statin-induced myositis. I have already mentioned that some diseases can be ruled out just by one line or one lab test. In this case, CK was normal, so we have ruled out all the inflammatory conditions of the muscles in which the CK is raised, like polymyositis, statin-induced myositis, or the dermatomyositis. These are the exclusion criteria. The left thing, we are only left with the 2 or 3 options. Adhesive capsulitis, if bilateral, can present with rather similar physical finding, but inflammatory markers are normal. So another clue for the ruling out as adhesive capsulitis are that in this inflammatory markers will be normal, but here in this scenario ESR was elevated. Polymyalgia rheumatica, on the other hand, fits this scenario, and the polymyalgia rheumatica is relatively common chronic inflammatory condition of the unknown etiology that affects elderly individuals. So there will be history of elderly patient. It is characterized by the symmetrical myalgia of the hip and shoulder girdles with accompanying morning stiffness or greater than 45 degree, and polymyalgia is the diagnosis of exclusion. Lab finding include elevated ESR, CRP, but the normochromic normocytic anemia. So in the history, he can also give the history of the fatigue because the anemia factor is there, so patient can present with the fatigue as well. as in the case of fibromyalgia. So this picture was very important and very cute picture for remembering the polymyalgia rheumatica, this old age lady. Diagnosis of exclusion, it is a diagnosis of exclusion. There is a normal CK, ANA, RF, TSH, and the muscle enzyme. There is no weakness, no atrophy, the normal muscle strength, and normal electromyography. The muscle test will be normal in these patients. Next comes, which of the following is the earliest sign of flexure sheath infection? This is a one liner scenario. This is just a straightforward point you have to remember. This picture is very important. This is called Canavel sign. Canavel sign is for flexure sheath infection. That is, the first thing you encountered in Canavel infection is pain in the passive extension. Then you are finding the tender joints, pain to percussion or pain on touch, which is tenderness. Tenderness is the next option here. And then there is a swelling of the finger, which is a sausage digit, and then patient's finger is held in the passive flexion. These are the four sequelae, or the four chronological ordered signs, Canavel signs you have to remember as such for the flexure sheath infection. So earliest sign will be pain on the passive flexion of the passive extension of this particular patient. Flexure sheath infection is also known as infective tenosynovitis. It is a serious sign infection that, if not attended to urgently, can result in a septic necrosis of the tendon sheath and surrounding structure. So it is a acute emergency for the patient. If left untreated, complication like soft tissue necrosis, osteomyelitis, necrotizing fasciitis can occur. Like, it is an infection of tenosynovitis, but it can join the bone, soft tissue, and ultimately necrotizing fasciitis. These are the four signs, which is also known as Canavel sign. We have already discussed it in a detail by this picture, and it is the flexed resting position of the affected finger, then fusiform swelling, tenderness, pain, and the order of these events are basically: earliest is your passive extension pain, and then comes the tenderness, and then is the sausage shaped finger and the fixed resting position. So these are the order of sequelae that are occurring, order of sign, Canavel sign. Which of the following is not an expected physical finding in infectious tenosynovitis? So infectious tenosynovitis was second name for this flexure sheath infection we have already discussed. And four important point in the Canavel signs we have discussed: that the pain on the passive extension, fixed finger, fusiform swelling, tenderness. We haven't read about the pain on the flexion of the affected finger, so A is the right option here. This is again the same MCQ with the same justification, we are just skipping it. Next comes, a 47-year-old woman presents to your clinic with the 8-month right ankle swelling and the pain history. So there is a middle-aged lady presenting with the ankle swelling and pain. The patient relates that the ankle is stiff in the morning. There is a history of morning stiffness that lasts for the 1 hour. There is a significant morning stiffness in this patient. There is no other joint is involved. On examination, she has a temperature of 36.9. So temperature is not raised, it is within normal limit. The ankle joint is small and has restricted range of movement, slightly tender. So clear cut, there is an inflammatory arthritis is present, and the x-ray of the right ankle joint show peri-articular osteopenia and the narrow joint space of the right ankle. Which of the following could be presentation of most likely underlying cause? So first option, septic arthritis. We will rule out septic arthritis because in this scenario our temperature is normal. So as for septic arthritis, fever should be there. Septic arthritis is not the answer here. Next comes narrow joint space. The SLE patient's space is preserved, so we are ruling out SLE as well because narrow joint space is mentioned. We are left with the three options here: osteomyelitis, rheumatoid arthritis, and osteoarthritis. So we will see what would be the right answer here. So D is the right answer here, rheumatoid arthritis. Why? This is a very important justification, and for the orthopedic point of view, we will remember this by this simple mnemonics, that SLE is a non-erosive joint space disease, so there is a preserved joint space, and the RA is an erosive disease, there is a joint space narrowing. One thing clear, otherwise in both diseases, like in SLE and RA, you will find the soft tissue swelling, mostly synovium, and the peri-articular osteopenia. Both conditions present with the peri-articular osteopenia and the soft tissue swelling, but the difference is that one is erosive and one is non-erosive. One will be presenting with the joint space narrowing, and one will be presenting with the preserved joint space. So there is two things we have covered: RA and SLE. Other thing important was rheumatoid osteoarthritis. So osteoarthritis is remembered as loss, LOSS. So there is a loss of the joint space. There will be osteophytes. There will be subchondral sclerosis. There will be subchondral cyst. There is no debate about the periarticular osteopenia or the periarticular osteoporosis in osteoarthritis, as mentioned in our scenario. So osteoarthritis is ruled out by this important mnemonic. Loss of joint space, osteophytes, subchondral sclerosis, and subchondral cyst. To remember the rheumatoid arthritis, we have to remember spades is soft tissue swelling, periarticular osteoporosis or osteopenia, absent osteophytes was the feature of osteoarthritis. Then comes deformity, because it's an erosive disease, erosions will be the late feature, and subluxation, there will be dislocation of the joint. So important things we have already covered in this things. Only thing we are left behind was osteomyelitis. Osteomyelitis is basically a different thing. This is a local presentation of osteomyelitis that usually seen in affected bone rather than the adjacent joint. So it is a disease of bone primarily, not the joint. For one thing was that clue. And the osteomyelitis has insidious onset with a constitutional symptom. It can present with a fatigue, fever, chills, and local bone tenderness. Early pain radiological finding osteomyelitis are subtle and not obvious until 5 to 7 days from the onset in children and 10 to 14 days in the adults. So another clue can be there that it's an insidious onset in the case of osteomyelitis. Radiograph at the time may show the following. There will be effusion of the joint, there will be regional osteopenia of affected joint, there will be periosteal reaction due to elevation caused by the periostitis, there will be focal bony lytic lesions, loss of trabecular architecture, newborn formation, eventual peripheral sclerosis. So in osteomyelitis, basically your bone is eaten away. There will be lysis, there will be loss of trabecular architecture, there is newborn formation, sclerosis. Everything is happening in the bone, not at the level of joint mostly. So we have covered this very important justification. And another important thing is that osteoarthritis, O aggravated by activity. So OA is aggravated by activity. This is an important line as well. Next comes 68-year-old patient presents, young patient presents to you with the, not young, middle-aged patient presents to you with a medical evaluation. He is non-case of benign prostatic enlargement. Today he is complaining of the urinary problems in the form of difficulty starting micturition and dribbling at the end of urination, as well as constipation. He has back pain and the left thigh pain. On examination, there is a decreased sensation of the medial aspect of the left lower leg as well. Which of the following indicate intervertebral disc prolapse? So he has given some clues to us, and he has just straightforward asked about the diagnosis. So intervertebral disc prolapse, definitely whenever there is a disc prolapse, there will be impingement on the surrounding nerves. So we will have the nerve symptoms here. So if we just give a blind hint, there will be answer will be decreased sensation of the lower leg. But you have to be justified in your giving the answer. So answer is same. Yeah, D is the right option. But why? Of the options, only decreased sensation of the lower leg can be specific to the intervertebral prolapse, and others can be manifestation of the non-neurological problem. One by one, we will rule out this. uh, First of all, this prolapse is most commonly associated with the fecal incontinence, not the constipation. So one thing which is straightforward, rule out that the constipation is not going to be the right option, because your disc prolapse present with a fecal incontinence. Second, your radicular lower back pain, it is a non-specific. It can be due to chemical, it can be due to mechanical irritation of the nerve roots. And with back pain, you cannot make your clear-cut diagnosis. You associate the back pain with the other features like pain is sharp, shooting, electrical quality. Unilateral leg pain is more pronounced symptom, and it is often worse than the pain in the back. And the pain concentrate distally, running into the lower limb, usually extending below the knees. And the pain and numbness paresthesias follow dermatomal distribution. These are all the clues that are solving the puzzle for the radiculopathy. That the patient is having radiculopathy, patient will present with the back pain along with the unilateral leg pain, along with the neurological sign and symptom of paresthesia, pain, numbness. Reflexes will be reduced or absent in this case, and motor weakness is not always present. So we are dealing with the radiculopathy if the back pain is presenting in this way. Then lesions of the chorda equina. Chorda equina also present with the back pain, leg pain, paresthesia around the anus. This is very important, that the chorda equina present with the paresthesia around the anus and urinary incontinence. In our scenario, there was no urinary incontinence, rather the patient was having problem in starting micturition and terminal dribbling. So this was not the option here. Next comes the disc prolapse in the lumbar area. If there is a lumbar area disc prolapse, patient can present with the back pain and thigh pain. Such pain may be caused by the other factors than radiculopathy. Back pain may be due to mechanical stressor. Back pain is a common factor, mechanical and neural back pain. Accompanying symptom only indicator help to differentiate the two. We have already discussed that. Next comes the 49-year-old woman presents to the GP clinic with the progressive low back pain that is shooting and radiates to the left buttock. From this line, it shows that maybe it's a sciatic pain, that the patient is having back pain that is a shooting and radiate to the left buttock. She denies any preceding trauma or sprain. Medical history is significant for the breast cancer. Okay, when we deal with the back pain, then or there is a history of cancers, then your mind should be alert that there can be mets. This should not be ignored. And the patient already had breast cancer. She already had osteoarthritis for the lumbosacral spine. On examination, there is tenderness on the left L4 L5 area or the positive straight leg raise on the left side. Which of the following features assessment is indication for the further assessment? So no debate about this question. This is a straightforward question that past history of breast cancer is a red flag. This is an alarming symptom that alert you for the further investigation. This patient has progressive back pain. Shooting in nature makes the radiculopathy possibility. So there was involvement of the nerve. There is a radiculopathy. For the acute episodes of lower back pain, it's common and managed thoroughly with a history and physical examination. There is a negative alarming sign. The patient can be managed as such. But in this patient, our patient had the breast cancer, which is a most common site for the metastasis is bone, especially in the case of either we are dealing with the breast, prostate, lung or kidney disease. 80% of the chances of mets are there, and the 60% of chances in the multiple myeloma that you will find the lytic lesions in the bone. These two things are alarming symptoms that the patient needs further workup. These are the different symptoms that are combining for our history, that the history of cancer with the new onset of back pain, there is a history of weight loss or the failure to improve after 1 month, patient age, old age, extremes of age greater than 50 or less than 20, or nocturnal pain. These are alert, it should alert your mind towards the cancer, that you are dealing with the cancer, you have to work up for the cancer. Then if the patient is having fever, he's a IV drug abuser, there is a recent infection, immunocompromised state, then you are dealing with the infections. So most likely you go for the workup for the infections. Then if the patient is having fecal incontinence, we have already discussed, and the saddle paresthesia or the lower limb weakness and paresthesia, you are dealing with the cauda equina syndrome. So this is an important syndrome as well for the radiculopathy, cauda equina syndrome. Then if the patient is having history of osteoporosis, use of corticosteroids, or the old age patient, you are dealing with the vertebral fractures in these patients. So vertebral fracture is also an important cause of the back pain. And another important question here is that if the patient is having morning stiffness that improve with exercise, this is very important, that improve with exercise, and waking up, nocturnal pain is there in the young patient, you are dealing with ankylosing spondylitis. Ankylosing spondylitis is basically the seronegative arthritis. It's a seronegative arthritis, and this is a very important topic as well. We will discuss it someday. Seronegative arthritis, and there is HLA-B27 association. So this is